17 right now. Corazon Aquino has been president of the Philippines for 2 days now. Her countrymen are still celebrating, but now she has to turn her attention to the tremendous job of building a new government and rebuilding her country. In her first American television interview, I spoke with President Aquino earlier this morning from her office in Manila. I started by asking her what, if any, doubts she has about her ability to be a strong leader.
Well, maybe I do have some doubts, but right now, because of the tremendous support I have been getting from the people, not only in terms of rallying to my cause, but also I have seen so many instances where they have helped me. Take, for example, the day after Mr. Marcos left, there was so much debris in the street, and I was worried that night about how we would clean up the following day. And lo and behold, the next day, people just came to the streets, cleaned up themselves, and this is what really inspires me, when people are now doing so many things for their country, and they are doing this on their own.
Madam President, let's talk about some of the challenges you face. Your Vice President, Mr. Laurel, told me yesterday that before you can attack the economic problem, you need political stability. On the other hand, the problems are so great in the economy. What specific first steps are you going to take to clean up the economy?
Well, first of all, we do have to have political stability, and we are getting there. I have appointed almost my entire cabinet. I intend to be finished appointing the members of my cabinet in about 2 more days. And I have gotten assurances from other governments that they will indeed help us in our economic recovery program.
The $6 billion owed by your country to United States banks, are you going to ask our country, the banks, to roll over on that debt, or to extend the limit on the payment time? What?
I will ask for better terms, and similarly to what was done in Argentina when a new government took over, they were given much better terms, and this is what I will ask of our creditors, to give us time and to allow us to recover, so that it will be to their interest also, so that we can pay them back as soon as possible.
Specifically, what might you begin to ask the United States for in terms of economic aid?
Well, I have said that my main concern is in the area of the poor, the unemployed, and the underemployed. So specifically, this calls for food and aid in agriculture. I want to put greater emphasis on agriculture so that we can take care of our domestic needs. And this will also entail setting up small and medium-sized businesses in the rural areas. So I will ask for aid along these lines.
As you know, there's great concern here about the 2 bases that the Americans have there in your country. Your chief of staff suggested that those bases are important to Philippine security and defense and area defense, and you should put it to the people for a vote as to whether those bases stay there after '91. To what extent do you share his view?
Well, I do respect the military bases until 1991. And I would like to, as I have said, I will keep all of my options open. And definitely, I will look first into Filipino interest as far as those 2 bases are concerned. But overall, we will discuss with our ASEAN neighbors and, of course, the United States on how best we can work to the interest of the entire world as far as these bases are concerned.
Would you expect, Madam President, to put it to a vote of the people, though?
After negotiations, not before.
Regarding the amnesty you've declared regarding the communist guerrillas for 6 months, the amnesty, how many of those do you think are going to come home to your society?
Well, just yesterday, it was reported to me that some of those who had joined the communists would like to now come down from the hills and would like to return to the fold. So I imagine a great many will be answering our call and will be coming down to work for our government now, not as part of the cabinet, but simply to become integrated into our society again.
To what extent would you consider sharing power with some communists, though?
I have said that I will I will not appoint anyone who is a communist in my cabinet or in my government. They are free to come down to renounce all forms of violence and to pledge allegiance. To tell you frankly, we've never talked to each other.
You've never spoken to the man?
No, even before he declared martial law, and even when my husband was a senator, there never was any occasion for the two of us to talk to each other. It was only Imelda Marcos that I had ever talked to.
And could you tell me about that?
Oh, Imelda Marcos. Well, before we used to attend the PTA meetings. Our two daughters went to the same school. And then after that, when my husband was elected as senator, we would see each other at luncheons for the Senate ladies.
Mrs. Aquino, there have been these reports in a Philippine newspaper about an assassination attempt on Defense Minister Juan Ponce Enrile and possible plans for assassination attempts on you and other members of the new government. Are those reports true?
Well, I really don't know, but I've always believed that being in public life, you have to expect hazards like these.
Now, you've just released over 30 prisoners held in various jails and prisons for their political views. None of those include communists, is that correct?
Well, I did want to release all political prisoners. We are coordinating the various lists. You see, no one really has a master list of all of the political prisoners in this country. And, you know, Dan, this was one of my campaign pledges, that I would see to it that all political prisoners would be released. So this is being done on an installment basis as we go through all the lists.
And so you intend to release communists as well as others who are political prisoners?
Well, yes, but they have to pledge allegiance to my government, and they have to renounce all forms of violence.
That's the criteria you mentioned before, wasn't it? That they must renounce all forms of violence. Do you consider yourself a close ally of the United States, Mrs. Aquino?
Well, I consider the United States and Americans in particular as my friends.
With all respect, the question was, do you consider yourself a close ally of the United States?
I think so. I hope the United States thinks so, too.
Have you spoken to President Reagan any time over the past few days?
No, I have not. But I have just finished talking with Mr. Habib. We talked to each other this afternoon, and I have always been talking with Ambassador Bosworth.
Could you tell us some of what you discussed with Ambassador Habib?
Well, you see, the last time Mr. Habib was here, I told him that, Mr. Habib, I cannot really tell you how long this peaceful and nonviolent struggle of ours will take, but you will just have to wait and see what we Filipinos are capable of doing. And this afternoon he said, well, I remembered those words of yours, and certainly you showed not only the United States, but the entire world, that we Filipinos are indeed...
Began undoing human rights abuses blamed on ousted President Ferdinand Marcos. Aquino has freed nearly 36 political prisoners and indicated that several hundred more former dissidents may be released. As Jim Laurie reports now, Aquino has wasted no time in moving the Philippines away from other policies of her predecessor.
The Aquino government, in its first effort to address human rights abuses under President Marcos, released today a total of 34 people who were jailed, in most cases on charges of subversion. These 9 showing obvious pleasure at their release, some reunited at once with their families. At a so-called Thanksgiving Mass here this morning, General Fidel Ramos said the release of all political prisoners are being considered. There are at least 400 more in jail. A half dozen of them are known communists and may not be eligible under the Aquino amnesty. But on Good Morning America, President Aquino told David Hartman that she expected communists who are holding out in their mountain base camps to give up their fight.
It was reported to me that some of those who had joined the communists would like to now come down from the hills and would like to return to the fold. So I imagine a great many will be answering our call and will be coming down to work for our government now.
Aquino said her first priority as president is to deal with the questions of poverty in the nation's rural farming areas. Jim Laurie, ABC News, Manila.
And we'll hear more from President Aquino.
Let me ask Mr. Marcos that if you still have any loyalists here who intend to do the Filipinos harm, then please, Mr. Marcos, do your very best. Think of our country. Think of your countrymen who have already been hurt, who have already suffered so much under your regime. The time is now to make amends. And so whatever you can do to discourage your loyalists from inflicting more harm on our people should be your concern, and the sooner you are able to send messages to them that they should stop all of this possible harm that they may inflict on our people.
Madam President, your advisors, some of them have already said to us, said publicly, that it really is up to you whether or not to bring former President Marcos back to possibly face charges regarding the murder of your husband, Benigno Aquino, and to face other charges regarding crimes against the Filipino people. What's your plan?
Well, at the moment, it is best that Mr. Marcos stay out of the country until we have everything under control, meaning to say that his loyalists will no longer attempt any injury on our people. And in the meantime, I just ask Mr. Marcos to pray and to seek enlightenment from God.
Does that mean that at some point in the future, representing the people of your country, you might consider bringing Mr. Marcos back to face some kind of charges?
I will talk about that when the right time comes.
What do you want the United States to do about the reported millions of dollars of assets in our country that Mr. Marcos has reportedly in our country?
I have formed a commission with former Senator Jovito Salonga as head of this commission, and this will deal primarily with the problems of having a good government, and he will go and try to seek ways and means on how we can recover the hidden wealth of Mr. Marcos.
Madam President, how concerned are you that with the euphoria at the moment that the coalition of support that you have right now might, when the excitement wears off, begin to dissolve into factionalism, and people might start being every man for himself?
Well, after what we have demonstrated, not only to our countrymen, but to the entire world, how we Filipinos are ready to sacrifice and to fight for democracy, I think our people will continue to give of themselves so that we can unite and so that we can work together to make our country a great country.
General Ramos, we are told, is in very firm control of the military, but given what you said about Marcos loyalists still in the military and in the country, just how much concern do you have that you might not be totally in control of the military at this point?
I have very great respect for General Ramos, and he has assured me that he will give me all the support necessary and that he recognizes me as his commander-in-chief.
How concerned are you that the people of your country are so excited now they might expect a little too much too soon from what you're able to do?
Well, yesterday, as a matter of fact, when many questions were propounded to me at a press conference here in Manila, I told them to please remember that it's been, they were able to tolerate and to be patient with Mr. Marcos for 20 years. It's only been 48 hours now since I have taken over as President of the Philippines, and I would expect them to at least give me the consideration that they gave Mr. Marcos.
Madam President, what do you think your husband might say about my wife, the President?
Well, I'm sure he is as happy as the rest of the Filipino people are, because he did come home to join in the struggle to return our rights and freedoms. And I am so very glad that in a way I was responsible for bringing this about.
Madam President, congratulations to you and best to you in your new challenge to you and the people of the Philippines. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you very much.
Corazon Aquino earlier this morning. The last time I spoke with Mrs. Aquino was the day after she announced her candidacy, when she said, I'm just a housewife. Well, things have changed a lot. And tonight on Nightline, Ted Koppel in an extended conversation with Mrs. Aquino, President Aquino, and they will be talking about her extraordinary rise.
The new Chief of Staff of the Philippine Armed Forces prohibits the departure of privately chartered aircraft out of the country. The new government clearly wants to know, and to a degree control, not only who leaves the Philippines, but also what they take with them. Those restrictions were not applied to President Marcos, who took his family, associates, and belongings out of the Philippines aboard 2 U.S. Air Force jets. There were 60 passengers and, as John McWethy now reports, apparently a lot of belongings.
U.S. government sources tell ABC News that included in the baggage and personal effects of Ferdinand Marcos were many millions of dollars in cash, certificates of deposit, and titles to land holdings in the United States. The bulk of this material was found, sources say, in the 2nd U.S. Air Force plane that arrived in Hawaii this afternoon, bringing some 300 boxes belonging to the Marcos family from the Philippines. One agent involved in the search reportedly said he stopped counting his pile of money at about $3 million because his hands got tired. On the first plane, the one that carried Marcos and his party of 89, U.S. Customs agents reportedly found about $1 million in Philippine and U.S. currency. How is the U.S. handling the situation?
Any amount may be declared so long as the form is filled out. At this time, it does not appear that any U.S. law has been violated.
Marcos and his belongings were flown to Hawaii aboard U.S. Air Force C-141 transport planes at an approximate cost of $80,000. Extra details of Secret Service agents have been flown into Hawaii to provide security for Marcos until he can arrange for his own. Who will ultimately pay for all of this is a question that neither the White House nor the State Department could answer today. One official said that he expected the U.S. would pay, chalking it up as one cost of helping to avoid a bloody civil war in the Philippines. John McWethy, ABC News, the State Department.
Other fresh aspects of the Marcos departure and the operating style of his successor emerged in a lengthy interview with President Aquino a few hours ago. Mrs. Aquino told me of a phone call she received last Tuesday from the U.S. ambassador here in Manila.
Apparently there was a request from Mr. Marcos to stay longer in the Philippines from Clark, that he wanted to go to Paway, Ilocos Norte. That is his home province. And I asked first, is it because that he believes that his end will come soon, that he would like to die in his own home? And I was assured that it wasn't so. So I said, well, when Mr. Marcos has taken his rest, when he has gotten his sleep, then I have to strongly urge him to continue with his trip, because it is to the greater interest of the Filipino people that he leave the Philippines right away.
If he dies, and he appears to be a very sick man, if he dies soon, while all the memories are still fresh, and his family said he wants to be buried in his homeland, what would you say?
You know, if we had not gone through such critical days, maybe I could tell you right out now, Ted, sure, they can come back and they can bury him, but we cannot afford that kind of tension now. It's been too soon. Maybe at some future date they can come back, but right now it's out of the question.
President Aquino is approaching her political adversaries on the left and right with the same mixture that in earlier times was known as the mailed fist in a velvet glove.
This afternoon, I was told by a bishop from Mindanao that people who had gone up the hills had sent word that they would like to return to our society and would like now to be living with the rest of us.
Amnesty is possible if they want it. I mean, all you're saying is commit yourselves to nonviolence, rejoin society, and that's it.
Yes, but then if they do fight my government, then we will have to use the military force on them. That is also one thing very clear.
There's the tough side of Cory Aquino again.
Well, I guess that's in all of us, Ted. I can't imagine that you can be just one thing and not something else.
The only reason I raise it is because there are people who question whether that steel is there. And it has to be in a leader.
Whenever I'm faced with a difficult situation, I try to make the best of it, and I do not allow myself to be conquered. And I will do my very best to fight whatever prevents me from doing what I have set out to do.
President Aquino's own story of how she came to power and how she now plans to use it will be heard and seen in the rest of that interview on Nightline tonight. For the moment, here in the Philippines, people are still gauging for themselves the nature of this new and largely untested government. The first and most obvious beneficiaries, some of those who were jailed for their opposition to President Marcos. Here's Mark Litke.
Under the Marcos government, General Fidel Ramos was responsible for keeping political prisoners locked up. Today, under the Aquino government, Ramos was letting them go. He announced the first group of names during a mass held on a military camp. Within hours, his orders were being carried out at 2 military detention centers in Manila.
Detainees are hereby released.
Dozens of emotional reunions were held throughout the city as the former prisoners were reunited with families and friends. Myla Aguilar, a writer, served 1.5 years for subversion and rebellion. She says her only crime was her anti-government views. Ronaldo McClung served 7 years and was sentenced to death for an alleged assassination plot against Mr. Marcos. Now that he's out,
I have high hopes now that this will be the beginning of a better Philippines for our people.
there are still roughly 500 political prisoners being held in various camps around the country, including the founder of the Philippine Communist Party. But there will be no blanket amnesty. Releases will have to be decided on a case-by-case basis. And that decision has already caused some friction among Aquino advisors. The military, which wants to hold on to known communists or those charged with violent crimes, versus the liberals, who want all political prisoners released. Mrs. Aquino will hear a lot of heated criticism from her ranks if all the political prisoners aren't released, and it appears the military has won out. But one of her aides said tonight that Aquino expects to hear criticism. It's the price she has to pay as the leader of a newly open society. Mark Litke, ABC News, Manila.
In a moment, Sam Donaldson in Washington.
So he is. And a pile of burning presidential documents also tells something about the man. A few were saved. One memo to Marcos recommended that he commute the death sentences of a group of political opponents, which included Benigno Aquino. The presidential advisor wrote, such action will demonstrate the compassion, tenderness, and kindness instilled in the heart of your excellency. But Aquino, the husband of the new president, was already dead when this memo was written, murdered by Marcos's men. No matter, the advisor wrote the president, it will make an excellent news item. Garrick Utley, NBC News in Manila.
Events in the Philippines these past few days have raced along at an amazing pace. Corazon Aquino talked about that in an interview with Garrick Utley, seen first this morning on NBC's Today program.
How does it feel to be president after these final tumultuous days here in the Philippines?
Well, it's not really just being president, but it is a glorious feeling that we have finally regained our democracy, and the most beautiful part is that we did it through peaceful and nonviolent means. So this is what I'm very happy about.
There is, of course, a long historic relationship between the Philippines and the United States. How do you think the Reagan administration handled itself in these final weeks leading to the takeover of power?
Well, the first Reagan statement was, of course, most disappointing when I thought that he was willing to recognize Mr. Marcos in spite of all the fraud and terrorism committed in the last elections. So definitely I felt much better after he had changed his views on that, and also I'm very grateful to American media and the observers who came here when they gave a more accurate picture of what had transpired in the last elections.
A major preoccupation in the Reagan administration are the American military bases here at Clark Air Force Base in Subic Bay. What is your position towards these American installations now that you are the president?
Well, for the nth time, I intend to respect the military bases until 1991, and between now and then, I will keep all of my options open.
Would you like to see them stay on after 1991?
As I said, I will keep all of my options open.
For his part, Ferdinand Marcos today remained isolated in luxury, contemplating where he should now call home. Marcos, his family, and a few dozen associates have taken up residence at Hickam Air Force Base in Hawaii. Officials describe Marcos' house as a modest cottage. He stayed here at this cottage all day, reportedly exhausted by his trip into exile. The street leading to the house has been blocked off, and a Coast Guard cutter is patrolling the shore. On Monday, it turns out, the day before the end of the Marcos regime, Imelda Marcos called her friend Nancy Reagan at the White House. Mrs. Marcos asked what the United States' position was toward the turmoil in Manila. Mrs. Reagan told her that it was important to avoid violence and bloodshed, and that the United States would provide safe haven for a
large group of political prisoners jailed during the reign of ousted President Ferdinand Marcos. The new government says hundreds more will soon be freed. Garrick Utley reports on developments in the Philippines today, which include a look inside the ransacked presidential palace.
Corazon Aquino had promised it, and today it began to happen. The release of political prisoners held by Marcos. 39 were freed. Ronaldo McClung packed his bag in his cell and reflected on the 6 years and 2 months that this had been his world.
I'm very happy. No regrets. I've learned a lot inside prison.
There are several hundred more political prisoners, and it's not known when they will be allowed to rejoin their families. Mrs. Aquino has said they will all be released, but the army is thought to be worried about some who had fought for the communist guerrilla movement, such as this man who complained that Marcos had been allowed to get away with his freedom and fortune, and he is still in prison.
And yet Cory Aquino is willing to forgive Marcos for what he has done to our country. What are we in comparison to Marcos?
Mrs. Aquino is grappling with the Marcos legacy. This is part of it, the presidential palace, the way Marcos left it. At the end, he was a president under siege. In his office, the final tally sheet of who in the army was with him and who against. The Marcoses didn't take it all with them. Mrs. Marcos left enough designer clothes to stock a boutique and a lot of beauty products. Bedside reading included a sales brochure of the most expensive property in London. Marcos was house hunting. A patient's handbook on kidney transplants suggests how ill he is. And a pile of burning presidential documents also tells something about the man. A few were saved. One memo to Marcos recommended that he commute the death sentences of a group of political opponents, which included Benigno Aquino. The presidential advisor wrote, such action will demonstrate the compassion, tenderness, and kindness instilled in the heart of your excellency. But Aquino, the husband of the new president, was already dead when this memo was written, murdered by Marcos's men. No matter, the advisor wrote the president, it will make an excellent news item. Garrick Utley, NBC News in Manila.
Ferdinand Marcos is now biding the first days of his exile at the Hickam Air Force Base in Hawaii under the protection of Secret Service bodyguards. Officials expect Marcos and his family to move into 2 nearby mansions within the next few days. In the meantime, he will stay at this base on the outskirts of Honolulu in what officials call a modest single-story cottage. The frail Marcos didn't venture outside today, reportedly because he is exhausted. Streets leading to the house are closed to traffic. And nearby, a Coast Guard
for power.
Let me ask Mr. Marcos that if you still have any loyalists here who intend to do the Filipinos harm, then please, Mr. Marcos, do your very best. Think of our country. Think of your countrymen who have already been hurt, who have already suffered so much under your regime.
One of Aquino's first moves was to order the release of some political prisoners, people detained under the old regime. Today, 39 prisoners were set free. They're the first of hundreds expected to follow over the next week. Roger Smith has more on the amnesty.
We are hereby releasing you by this authority.
There was joy and tears. The political prisoners of Marcos, set free by Aquino. Students, poets, and professors, some held for as long as 6 years on trumped-up charges as subversives, a label that Marcos pinned on almost any critic.
The Almighty God.
News of the release came at an early morning mass. The rebel soldiers who once ran Marcos's jails, now running the country, blessed with open arms by the church.
Thank you for your help.
And announcing the first dramatic move of the Aquino government.
For the release of political detainees.
It was a long day while all the forms were processed. But after years in jail, waiting the final hours to freedom meant nothing, especially with friends and relatives arriving for happy reunions.
I haven't seen my child yet, but I hope to see her soon. I'm glad that I'll finally be with her.
Well, I'm very happy. No words could best describe the happiness I have.
There are an estimated 500 political prisoners in the Philippines, many of them tortured and never charged at all. But the new government is moving cautiously, not throwing open the prison doors. Avowed members of the still illegal Communist Party will not be released.
I had 3 cases. One was illegal possession of subversive materials, the second was subversion, and the third was rebellion.
Mila Aguilar is a college administrator. She's been in jail 18 months. For her, a last look at her cell, a final wave at fellow prisoners she leaves behind. A few more formalities, then hours later, freedom, and hugs of joy from her 82-year-old mother and her son. Roger Smith, CTV News, Manila.
For myself to be conquered, and I will do my very best to fight whatever prevents me from doing what I have set out to do.
Good evening. I'm Ted Koppel in Manila, and this is Nightline. She once described herself to a campaign audience as simply a housewife. But President Aquino has already shown that she is comfortable with power and knows how to use it. Our in-depth interview tonight.
This is ABC News Nightline. Reporting from Manila, Ted Koppel.
Television is not most or even much of the time a profound medium. Cliches are often a convenient shorthand for us, and when a new public figure presents us with the sort of juicy cliche that Corazon Aquino bestowed on us a few months back, we seize it, relish it, and are reluctant to let go of it. She was the one who introduced herself as a woman, just a housewife, and we were unable to resist. We married it to another cliche and turned it into a battle between the housewife and the dictator. But now that she is president of the Philippines and Ferdinand Marcos is a tired old man in exile, we are obliged to re-examine the personality of this remarkable housewife. And that she will help us do a little later in this broadcast in what we think you will find is a rather revealing interview. But first, we have rewound the videotapes, and Nightline correspondent James Walker reminds us of the extraordinary evolution of Cory Aquino.
When she returned to the Philippines in 1983 to bury her husband, Corazon Aquino did not imagine that in just 2.5 years she would be president. Or did she?
When I first learned about all these people coming to our home to see Ninoy, I was just astounded by the numbers. And I said, this proves Ninoy did not die in vain.
Ninoy Aquino's assassination at Manila Airport set off the chain of events that led to the sudden defeat of his rival, Ferdinand Marcos, by his wife, Cory. But at first, she seemed an unlikely politician.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen of the press. Am I being heard? It is too high.
This is the press conference where she announced her candidacy 2.5 months ago.
The mere fact that many people are considering me a woman, just a housewife.
She certainly had no experience in the subtleties of international politics, and her first comment on U.S. bases in the Philippines got her into hot water.
We are for the removal of the bases and that we will not allow any other foreign bases to be established on our soil.
She had to backtrack on that statement, but not before she got into more trouble answering a question about the communist insurgency in the Philippines.
Oh, boy, you're really asking me a tough question. Anyway, from what people have told me, communism here is purely domestic and not dependent on foreign or international communism.
And she seemed overwhelmed by backroom political maneuvering. This statement came during negotiations to convince Doy Laurel to run as vice president.
This is the tiredest I've ever been in my life.
It was that image of a tired, weak woman that former President Marcos tried to exploit.
Housewife.
This is one of a series of commercials that ran on Marcos-controlled TV stations. The narrator, pretending to be Cory Aquino, is asking, how can I handle the responsibility? It's too tough. This is a man's job.
Ang buhay ng milyong-milyong Pilipino,
So how did she prove it was a woman's job? Her brother-in-law, Paul Aquino.
I'll put it this way, she's very high IQ for having graduated mathematics. That's number one, you have to accept that. Number two, she is a very strong person internally, and she can disarm anybody.
And disarm them, she did. The tremendous crowds came to see a Cory Aquino who had learned how to deliver a speech.
This woman of peace who stands before you today is claiming the people's due, the presidency.
A Cory Aquino who had learned how to handle the press.
Excuse me, can I request the photographers to please go down?
And a Cory Aquino who had learned how to confront the issues.
I am not a communist. I have never been a communist, and I do not intend to be a communist. Also, as far as the bases are concerned, I'd like to reiterate my stand on this, that I am respecting the basis agreement up to 1991. And since there may be many events which will occur between now and then, I would like to keep all of my options open.
And when she was being cheated out of her victory by massive voting fraud, she stood her ground for 10 difficult days.
I hope to see all of you there tomorrow. Your resounding vote for me last February 7 compels me to accept the mantle of leadership. Therefore, I shall lead.
I suppose the assassination was the biggest trauma. If you can survive that and take it calmly, and I think that's what made her different from everybody else. That's what made her President Aquino.
I, Corazon Cojuanco Aquino, do solemnly swear.
That it was a remarkable transition. Just 75 days for Cory Aquino to move from symbol of the martyred opposition to President of the Philippines. This is James Walker for Nightline in Manila.
When we come back, we'll meet the reluctant candidate who became president of 55 million Filipinos.
Take vengeance. I demand justice not only for Ninoy, but for all the Filipinos who have been victimized by Marcos.
The image of a latter-day Joan of Arc, shy, reluctantly taking up a cause she had never sought, was certainly played for all it was worth. But listen now to President Aquino as she describes her painful path to political candidacy, and you can hardly doubt that initially, at least, she would gladly have passed the cup to anyone else.
At that time, Ted, all I knew I was going to do was to come back to Manila as soon as possible and to make sure that my husband would have a decent burial. That was my main concern at that time.
And then how, at some point or another, you must have gotten the feeling that people wanted you to become what, a symbol?
Well, soon after my husband's burial, people had come to me telling me that I should now, you know, continue what he had started out to do. And I said, no, that's not the life for me, but I will help because this is what my husband lived and died for, to bring back democracy in our country. But I can assure you, I never imagined this present role that I am occupying now.
So tell me a little about the evolution, then, of your thinking. What happened? How did you come to begin to see yourself, then, as more of an activist than simply a symbol?
Well, I guess the rallies had a lot to do with that. The first big rally after my husband's funeral was on September 21, the anniversary of martial rule. So at that rally, I think there were about 500,000 people. And of course, they said I would be the last speaker, and I said, how long do I have to speak? And they said, oh, you can talk as long as you want. I remember telling Senator Aquino, look, they can take my place, you know, it's all right, I can just sit here and maybe just lead in the pledge. And he said, no, Cory, you just have to say something. And I was just so nervous at that time. This was my first ever to speak before such a huge crowd. And I don't know how I got through that day.
No. Did it come to you one day as an inspiration? Did someone come to you and say, you know, Cory, you could be president if you want to? How was that decision made?
Well, I think the first time it happened was maybe a year and a half ago, when one of the assemblymen said that the only person who can unite the opposition is Cory Aquino. And you know what I told him when I saw him soon after that was printed in one of our alternative press. I said, will you please keep your mouth shut and don't ever say that again? And he was just laughing. And I said, you might think, you know, it's a joke, but please don't even say it again. And one day after speaking before a sorority, they asked me, when will you ever announce if you will be a candidate or not? So finally I said, all right, if 1 million people will sign this draft Cory Aquino movement, and if Mr. Marcos will call for snap elections, then I will at least think, you know, about being a candidate. Of course, in the back of my mind, I was sure that Mr. Marcos would never call for snap elections, because I thought, why should a man who still has 2 more years, I mean, he was not scheduled to run again until 1987, why should he want to be in a contest when there was no need to do that? And so when I heard one day, and when he announced it on American television that he had indeed called for snap elections, I said, oh, I'm a goner. And I asked how many people have signed, and when they said only 200,000, I said, well, thank goodness, you know, I can still wait. But it seemed that that was all that the people needed to know, and in such a short time, they got more than 1,200,000.
Let's talk about your personality a little bit. Even now, there is, and it's a wonderful image, a little bit shy, demure, will of iron, but very much kept behind the scenes. Did you change a lot? Once you decided, I get the sense that you're someone who takes a long time to make up her mind, but when you do, God help anyone who tries to get in your way. Have you always been that way?
Well, I've always been a strong person. I'm a very private person. But I guess when my husband was incarcerated, I knew I had to do certain things. I mean, I could no longer just keep in the background. Whereas before, my main occupation was making sure that our children would grow up in, to responsible citizens. But I would only campaign during election time, and I would only confine my campaigning to marketplaces and to factories. I never had to give any speeches. All I had to do was smile at people, shake hands with them, and ask them to vote for Ninoy Aquino.
The typical candidate's wife.
Yes,
That's a horrible job, isn't it?
It is, but a year after we got married, my husband was already in politics. I remember when my father would run for Congress, we didn't have to go out campaigning as my children had to do this time. So it's something very different now. And I'm fortunate in that my youngest daughter loves publicity, loves people. And
oh, she's so shy. And
so this was great for her. In fact, she was the only one who was for this. My other daughters and my son were saying, why does it have to be you?
Why did it?
Because the only way we could defeat Mr. Marcos was if we only had one candidate.
It was like the successful operation in which the patient died. By most accounts, Mrs. Aquino won the election hands down. But President Marcos simply claimed that he had won and used his power to make the claim stick. When we come back, Mrs. Aquino gives us her behind-the-scenes account of the 4-day rebellion that gave her the presidency.
Sincerity and honesty.
Justice is no longer possible.
Her advisors were pushing for dramatic, even violent confrontation with the Marcos forces. Mrs. Aquino said no. She called instead for a 3 to 6 month campaign of modest boycotts and peaceful demonstrations. Last Saturday, 2 men, the defense minister and the acting chief of staff of Philippine Armed Forces, took matters into their own hands.
I was in Cebu, and we were at a rally. The rally started at 3 o'clock, and because we wanted it to end while it was still light, we finished at 5:30. And by the time we returned to our host's home, it must have been around 6 o'clock. But we had a friend with us who is a journalist, and she reported back to Manila, and she got the news that Mr. Enrile and General Ramos had indeed gone to Aguinaldo, and we were just, so amazing. None of us knew if he had been arrested or if he had gone there voluntarily. It wasn't until maybe an hour afterwards when we were finally able to get more news about him. Then I was talking to Minister Enrile at around, imagine it's around 9 o'clock. And I remember telling him that, Johnny, I'm sorry, the only thing I can do for you now is to offer you my prayers. And he said, well, Cory, that's the most important thing, or that's the only thing that counts now. And I said, oh my goodness, is he saying goodbye? Or
were you hiding out at that point, or were there people on your staff or friends and advisors of yours who said, better lie low, this could get very nasty?
Well, that night, I think the men in our group were rather tense, and they were saying, look, maybe we better wait a while. And I was just so sure that the sooner we could get back here, the better it would be.
What did you think was going to happen? I mean, did you believe that it might actually reach the point of civil war? I mean, here you had 2 of the most powerful military men in the country going up against the rest of the most powerful military men in the country.
But what was most amazing was the reports that I got, and even when I was in Cebu, that the people had just gone to these 2 camps to defend the military. This was the most amazing part, that for the first time, the civilians were out there defending the military. And so I asked how things were, and the women were telling, oh, we are just ready to, be a human barricade. And they were, in fact, some of them were telling me, we offered cigarettes to the soldiers who were in tanks, and we gave them flowers. And it was, so how did they react to this? Oh, they were very nice, and we shared whatever food we had. And then later on, they turned back. So the things that were happening, they were just so unbelievable. But I said, maybe this is what we have long been praying for. And I think it was Monday when I visited the Cardinal.
Cardinal Sin?
Then, yes. And I told him, well, Your Eminence, you've long been telling me that not to worry and that the miracle is forthcoming. So is this it? And he said, yes, I think so, Cory, because the people are just out there. And we just have to continue to pray that the other side will not resort to violent measures.
Let's jump ahead to Tuesday. Certainly has to rank as one of the more remarkable days in your life. Where were you when you heard that President Marcos had left?
Well, I was at my sister's home, and Ambassador Bosworth had told me that the Marcoses were preparing to leave, in the afternoon, and that he would let me know once they had gotten to Clark Air Base. And he did let me know that. And later on, apparently there was a request from Mr. Marcos to stay longer in the Philippines from Clark, that he wanted to go to Paway, Ilocos Norte. That is his home province. And I asked first, is it because that he believes that his end will come soon, that he would like to die in his own home? And I was assured that it wasn't so. So I said, well, when Mr. Marcos has taken his rest, when he has gotten his sleep, then I have to strongly urge him to continue with his trip, because it is to the greater interest of the Filipino people that he leave the Philippines right away, so that tensions will ease and that we will be able to get back to normalcy at the earliest possible time.
If he dies, and he appears to be a very sick man, if he dies soon, while all the memories are still fresh, and his family said he wants to be buried in his homeland, what would you say?
If we had not gone through such critical days, maybe I could tell you right out now, Ted, sure, they can come back and they can bury him, but we cannot afford that kind of tension now. It's been too soon. Maybe at some future date they can come back, but right now it's out of the question. I cannot endanger more lives.
You're a curious mixture, if you'll permit my saying so, of charity and toughness.
I guess I would have to be that, Ted. I feel very Christian about many things, but there are some cases where I just have to hang tough, not for my sake, but where human lives may be in danger. I do not want to be responsible for any more human lives being lost, because that will forever be on my conscience.
They call it, quite simply, people power. Mrs. Aquino and her unlikely military allies speak of it still with genuine awe. But even people power requires leadership. And now that leadership is hers. When we come back, President Aquino talks about what she plans to do with that power.
Is determined to remain permanent dictator, come hell or high water. I am determined to stop him.
I, Corazon Cojuangco Aquino,
Corazon Cojuangco Aquino, fulfill my duties
as President of the Philippines.
as President of the Philippines.
I should warn our affiliates that we're going to run a little long again tonight. Cory Aquino's story, we felt, was worth telling in as much detail as she would give us. I raised with her the issue of assassination. It is no stranger to the Aquino family.
Long ago, I have lived my life according to what I believe I should do at the moment, and I'm so convinced that if it isn't my hour to go, then there's nothing anybody can do. On the other hand, if it is time for me to go, then no matter where I am, there's nothing I can do to avoid it. Of course, my security people are telling me now I do not have to be so daring and that I should take some precautions. They did want me to wear a bulletproof vest in our rally before elections. But unfortunately, the bulletproof vest they gave me was a man-sized vest, and it made me look so fat. And I said, no way are you going to make me wear this. Besides, it was so hot. And maybe I would have collapsed from the sheer weight of it and from the heat.
Here you are in this extraordinary position now of being allied with some of the men who were your bitterest enemies. What about the men who were responsible for planning your husband's assassination? Now, there was a commission. The commission implicated, what, 26 men?
Yes, 26.
What about them?
Well, of course, General Ver is gone now. As I said, this commission will undertake not only investigating all of these cases, but putting up the necessary processes to deal with these people who have with these people who have victimized not only Ninoy Aquino, but so many of our Filipinos.
But it is possible that these men will come to trial.
Yes, that is a most distinct possibility, because justice doesn't mean just mercy. I mean, we can temper justice with mercy, but justice has to be there.
There must be, at this early stage of the presidency, still a little bit of a sense of awe when the phone rings and I don't know who's called you. It's President Reagan, it's Gorbachev.
No, President Reagan hasn't called me.
He hasn't?
Senator Kennedy has called, and Prime Minister Gandhi has called. Yes, it is a thrill, and I think more than that, it's my children really, especially my youngest daughter, who's just loving all of this. In fact, the first time Senator Kennedy called, she said, oh, you know, Mom, this is it. This is the ultimate. And she just had to say a few lines to him. And so I asked Senator Kennedy to please talk to her. I had met his son, Ted Kennedy Jr., here during the campaign. And so he was very willing to talk to her.
What other foreign leaders? You say Prime Minister Gandhi called. Who else?
Well, I've received messages from the Pope, from Prime Minister Thatcher, from, I guess, almost all of the leaders of the leading European nations. I have to keep on reminding myself that is this still Cory Aquino, or it is...
It's really not just Cory Aquino anymore. It's President Aquino.
Yes, I suppose. I still can't get to say on the telephone that this is President Aquino. I just say when I'm on the phone, this is Cory Aquino.
At best, journalism is a form of instant history in which reality is inevitably distorted by the pressure of deadlines. But in a few weeks, Cory Aquino will have less trouble recognizing that she is the president. Indeed, we felt the value of this interview lay precisely in the fact that it captures a very fragile moment between two phases in a life that is destined to be very important indeed to the Philippine nation. Tomorrow, I'll be on my way back home, and Charles Gibson will be sitting in for me in Washington. Peter Jennings will report once more on World News Tonight from Moscow. That's our report for tonight. For all of us here at ABC News in Manila, I'm Ted Koppel. Good night.
This has been ABC News Nightline. For a transcript of tonight's broadcast, send $2 to Journal Graphics, Box 234, Ansonia Station, New York, New York, 10023.